want to break it. So she's like, okay, fine, I'll just wear it. And she wore her sheitel, and on the way back, she got into a car accident. And when she arrived at the hospital, the doctor said, "You are one lucky lady. Somebody must really be looking out for you." When the car crashed, the windshield cracked into many pieces, and all the glass shattered and went towards her face. And because of the impact of the crash, her sheitel turned, and all the shards of glass were caught in the sheitel, protecting her face from blindness and many other things we can only imagine. Hair covering, a law and not a custom. It's an explicit law and not only a custom of the Torah that a married woman is to cover her hair. The Zohar states, I'm going to mention just the positive aspects because there's many things it does say negative. We're going to focus on the positive in chapter Mishnah Berurah, chapter 75. Her children will enjoy increased stature over other children. Moreover, her husband shall be blessed with all blessings, blessings of above and blessings of below, with wealth, with children and grandchildren. We really need to understand what here represents before we understand why we need to cover it. What is here? Here is dead. That's why it doesn't hurt when you cut your hair. There's no blood running through your hair. But if somebody pulls your hair, it hurts because it's connected to a life source. Klipa is a concealment of godliness. You can imagine a spiritual parasite or lice. Once lice attaches itself into a person's hair, it doesn't just stay in a person's hair. It actually sucks the blood out of a person. And it doesn't just affect the hair, but takes out life from the hair. The same way spiritually. If klipa, which is, you can call the Sahara, a spiritual parasite, attaches itself onto a hair, which is what it derives life from, and then it sucks out of Jews divine energies which we really need to serve Hashem. Here is also an excess of the body. For example, in a place where a person sweats, the hair grows thicker. Now spiritually, a person has certain character traits. To regulate the character traits, the excess is expelled through the hair. Just like sweat is expelled to regulate the body temperature, so too, the excess of this negative character traits are expressed through the hair. And it makes it difficult for a person to serve Hashem doing Torah mitzvahs. By way of analogy, you could just see in these pictures, this one shows how klipa goes and attaches itself onto a person's hair. And the other picture shows how here, klipa also goes out, this spiritual lice, this parasite, goes out of a person through their hair, and it's left on a person's hair. Now, it's a great mitzvah for a man to cut his hair every Erev Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, as a spiritual preparation for Shabbos. And a king, it says, should cut his hair every day, and a Kohen Gadol should cut his hair every 30 days. A man is called a mashpia, a giver. The klipa, this spiritual lice, this parasite, attaches itself onto a giver. And it makes it difficult for this person to perform Torah mitzvahs. It sucks out like that lice, if you can imagine. It just sucks out the life force, the blood from a person. So it sucks out the divine energies that they need to serve Hashem. A woman is called a nurturer. She's called a receiver. A woman is born with the perfect amount of divine spiritual energies that she needs to serve Hashem. Once she gets married and she unites with her husband, she takes on the role of being a giver as well, because she's connected to her husband. Now the klipa actually thrives on her hair even more so, because klipa goes after Devorah, severity, and a woman's source is she's from Devorah. So if a woman, any strand of a woman's hair is shown, it actually, the klipa goes after her hair, which makes it difficult for her to serve Hashem. This is brought down in Shulchan Aruch Chaim, chapter 75, paragraph 2, and Magen Avraham and the Zohar, which states that every single strand of a hair woman needs to be covered. Again, I'm just going to repeat, there are many different Rabbanim with many different sources, and You just have to go according to your Rav. Now, klipa only goes after living here because it's connected to a life force. Once here is cut, we're not in danger anymore. The woman's not in danger anymore of that klipa going after her here because it's cut off the life force. That's the only reason this spiritual life can actually attach itself to a Jew, because normally a Jew is very holy and it can't attach itself to a Jew, so it only goes after something that's dead, which is here, but because it's connected to life force, it can actually attach itself to the Jew. The following Rabbanim and sources allow human hair sheitels for this reason, because a woman's not in danger of being brought down by her divine energy being sucked out. Igros Moshe, Moshe Feinstein, Beleket Shikha Sapeya, Shiltas Hagibor, Rama, Rabbi Yisrael Eben Ezer, Yaskel Abdi, and many other Gedolim. So the famous question one asks is, why does a woman not cut her hair and is just required to cover it? Because a man is supposed to keep his hair cut short in order to make sure those divine energies don't get sucked out by the klipa. The answer is because in her source, she's not a giver. In her source, she's a nurturer. So she gets married, she takes upon some of being a giver because she unites with her husband, but only minimally. So her source is still more of a nurturer than a giver. So covering every single strand of hair is sufficient in keeping away the klipa. Is even one strand of hair of a woman allowed to be seen, let alone 2 fingers? Privately in the presence of her husband, a woman is permitted to expose side hairs, the hair growing in front of her upper ear, which extend beyond her kerchief. While other men are present, however, there is no heter to do so. Forehair protruding beyond the kerchief is halachically identical with erva, nakedness, just as or even more severe than the exposure of the leg. Exposure of the hair outside the kerchief is pritzas. To expose the least bit of hair is absolutely prohibited. Any who thinks this is permitted has obviously forgotten the Gemara that even schoolboys know. This is a direct translated quote from the tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek on Even HaEzer and Yorei Dea, as well as his commentary on Shas Gimel Brachos. And it also brings down a married lady's entire hair has to be covered. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Arach Chaim, chapter 75, paragraph 2. A sheitel and not only a kerchief, shawl, or hat. The Lubavitch Rebbe brings down the general idea of wearing only a sheitel and not just a hat or kerchief is because by very nature a sheitel covers all the hair. A kerchief is a person is constantly in the test themselves to push it, to push a little bit more, a little less, and for a short period of time, possibly somebody's hair is actually showing. The importance of having the hair covered at all times, again, the Zohar brings, it causes us to be blessed with all blessings, blessings of above, blessings of below, with wealth, with children and grandchildren. Very interesting, the Rebbe actually gave out loans to women to purchase sheitels, and he also said that a woman should have at least 2 sheitels, so that a woman shouldn't say, I'm going to go outside of my house with a sheitel because one is at the sheitel macher. I just Googled tichels online, and the majority of the ones that I saw being worn were like this. It just shows in each of these pictures here being shown. And I Googled sheitels online, and as you can see, every single strand of a woman's hair is covered. Why did Kimchas merit to have 7 sons to all become high priests? She attributed the merit to the fact that all my life, the rafters of my house never saw my hair. She was so modest that even in the confines of her own home, she never removed her hair covering. It's further brought down that most of us want to have at least 1, 2, 3 children that are extra special. They excel in so many ways, become not just the ordinary child. And Kimchas wasn't just satisfied with only 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of her sons to become Kohen Gadol. Most people didn't have their children to be Kohanim, but she wasn't satisfied until she had 7. And that's because she kept tznius to the utmost. And we could all get away with things because there are heterim. But when we were thinking about the future generation, the children that we're educating, the future Jews of our generation, going the utmost is certainly worthwhile to invest in. Mrs. Zelda Nemes relates, I was born in Russia, moved to Eretz Yisrael, and then I went to America. She went for a private audience with the Rabbi called a Yechidus. And I was wearing a hat and a Sheitel in the back. At the end of my first Yechidus, the Rabbi asked my husband to please leave the room, and then told me that one should wear a Sheitel. I stipulated that my hair was completely covered, and I was wearing a hat in the front and here in the back. And the Rebbe said that wearing a half a Sheitel is like having half of one's health. These words deeply concerned me, and the Rebbe smiled broadly and said, if one wears a Sheitel, one is promised gesund, parnasa, nachas from children and grandchildren. And then with a broad smile, the Rebbe asked me if there was anything else I wanted. And I said, that's enough. He then called my husband and told him to buy me the nicest Sheitel that others would also want to wear one. Kiso Harosh, the Rebbe says, is also a school for bearing children. Somebody writes a letter about asking advice regarding your brother having male children and healthy children. And the response was, you should find out from your brother whether his wife is careful to observe Kiso Harosh. For those, a Harak statement is known that a woman's observance of tznius, and especially Kiso Harosh, brings about blessings of above, blessings of below, with wealth, with children, and grandchildren. Kiso Harosh is a school for sustenance. Somebody writes to the Rabbi about the difficulty of earning a living, having financial straits, and the Rabbi responds, why the surprise at the financial straits when the Holy Zohar explains that when Kiso Harosh of the wife is in order, then they shall be blessed with all blessings, blessings of above, blessings of below, with wealth, with children and grandchildren. The Sheitel advantage. While some people feel that hair may ideally be covered with a kerchief, or a derivative such as a snood, the Rebbe shows that experience has shown otherwise. Because wearing a tichel or a snood, it's very easy to push the hair back. It's called a permanent Sheitel, an adjustable snood. And it's explained that sometimes a woman is in the company of others that don't hold by covering hair. And so they push it back because they feel uncomfortable that they're keeping this commandment. And every single day we daven to Hashem, please don't test me, please don't test me. So wearing a hair covering, anything other than a Sheitel, constantly puts us in that position to have to think, how much hair should I show? This, the Rebbe emphasis, is in complete opposition of the Shulchan Aruch, in the Halach and Shulchan Aruch, which clearly states that a woman must cover her entire hair. The Rebbe writes, one cannot fool God, and one cannot even fool the entire world. One can only fool oneself. What possible benefit can be derived from this? By contrast, the Rebbe adds that a woman wearing a Sheitel will not consider pushing it back. A Sheitel, by its very nature, covers the entire hair, thereby totally fulfilling the requirements of the Shulchan Aruch. What is so wrong with hair being exposed, and why is the Sheitel, that could sometimes be more attractive than natural hair, be acceptable? A woman does not cover her hair because her hair might be attractive and enticing, but because the exposure of a woman's hair is an invitation to the forces of impurity, which will then suck out life from her being able to serve Hashem, according to the Kabbalistic explanation. Another question somebody asked me, and I consulted with Rabbi Leshis of Muncie, said, if a woman wears such a beautiful Sheitel, it attracts so much more attention to a man than if a woman just wears a snood and she's showing some hair. And Rabbi Leshis responded, the way a male system works is that it gets stirred up by real living hair, not off the hair and somebody else's. It's compared to a beautiful plastic cake. somebody sees a gorgeous plastic cake, lots of flavors and gorgeous icing, but it's plastic, somebody's not going to salivate over the plastic cake. But if you see a small piece of chocolate cake, if it's a little smashed and a little gooey, you salivate because it's real cake. And in the words of the Holy Zohar, covering all of the here causes us to be blessed with all blessings, blessings of above, blessings of below, with wealth, with children and grandchildren. Overcoming imaginary difficulties in covering the here. Somebody writes to the Rabbi that they're having difficulty covering their hair in general. And they get a headache. And he responds that there's absolutely no question regarding this matter. And it's impossible that fulfilling God's commandments that you should be so uncomfortable. For example, when you write that wearing a sheitel makes your hair hurt, it's possible that the Yitzchak wants to make you not get showered with blessings, and so he makes your head hurt, and imagine it. But if it is true that your head really does hurt, then cut your hair short, and then it won't hurt. I personally experienced that. Whenever my head starts hurting under a sheitel, it's because I have to cut my pony. The Rabbi encouraged shorter hair, not shaving at all, because he says that shaving creates a nigel disfigurement, which may make a man unattracted to his wife. Although if your Rav does say you should shave your head, you can. But this is the Rebbe's shita. The Rebbe specifically asked a bakasha nafshis, a personal request, for all women to cover their hair with a full sheitel outside of their home. It's a cute, funny story, scary, but I thought it was funny. A few years ago, in East Rutherford, in Chase, there was a bank holdup, and a bank robber came in, and he had brought in a gun, and a woman from our community was there, and the police was alerted, and by the time the police arrived, the bank robber wanted to escape, so he grabbed the woman's hair to hold her as hostage, and she managed to wriggle out of her sheitel. And by the time he realized that the police already had shot him and caught him. So but it was nice how you could clearly see that a sheitel for hair covering actually saved her life. I'd like to thank Chana Hinda, Aziza Wiggs, Moana Wiggs, Ari Rosenzweig, and Ariella and Layla Chomsky, Yafa Sebbag for making this event happen. This slideshow, if you'd like, we actually have them printed in handouts. You're welcome to take if you'd like. We can give them to you before you leave. And now, if anybody had any questions that they wrote down, please pass it up. Rabbi Sebbag will be happy to answer questions for 10 minutes. And then we'll start with Chana Hinda will come. And if you have any questions, she'll do some tips on maintaining your sheitel. Thank you.
Okay.
If you have any other questions, you're welcome to pass them up.
Okay, the first question here is, why don't men have to cover if they're also givers? And to elaborate on that point, it was briefly mentioned that in Shulchan Aruch it says, mitzvah gedayla is stop of Erev Shabbos. It's a great mitzvah to get a haircut on Erev Shabbos. And it's very prevalent, especially in the Hasidic worlds. There's a letter from the Noam Elimelech on this, but it's actually specifically encouraged for a man, when he does get a haircut, to actually get a very, very short haircut. And to get it frequently. And aside for that, you do see that when times that a man is going to daven, for example, he will cover his head with a hat. Or for example, even more so, you see the custom that before a man gets married, he doesn't cover his head with a talus, even if he wears a talus. But after he gets married, so then he covers his head with a talus when he prays. So over here again you see that there's an extra measure of covering the hair, and although it should be short and it should be cut short, that should be done, and it's especially prevalent at times of prayer, times of tefillah, making brachas, etc. Okay. Why can't a woman wear a sheitel made of her own hair? Okay, so the halacha is brought down from certain sources that some opinion, the original source is that it is possible, but that's not the halacha that we practice. And the reason for that is because it's an idea of maris ayin. It's an idea people will see her with her own hair, and then they'll think whatsoever she's not wearing. They won't even think she's wearing a sheitel because it's her own hair. If she's wearing, somebody else's hair, it's dyed fine. It's dyed closer to her hair color, whatever it is, but nonetheless, this idea of maris ayin does not apply. The idea of maris ayin is what other people will think that it's actually her own hair, because it is her own hair. So as far as the covering of the hair is concerned, yes, it would cover the hair, but there's an additional idea of maris ayin. Okay. Why is hair covering not a form of control of woman restricting her individuality? Okay, so that's a good question, and also it comes from the perspective in general of what mitzvahs are about. And it also makes a difference the way we perform mitzvahs in general. If we look at it as a way to connect to Hashem, so that is now our individuality. Our individuality is, how can I better connect to Hashem? And if it's a better connection to Hashem when my head is covered, and this enhances my observance of Torah and mitzvahs, so that is the perspective of always wanting to connect to Hashem. If the outlook is that these are that Judaism is rituals that I must observe, then first of all, one is always looking how to observe it in the most convenient way that is not that's not bothersome, because there's an I that has to do rituals, as part of a spiritual conscience. And so when it comes to, for example, something that's a heter, then of course, the letter of the law says you're allowed to do this, then certainly I'll do this. And that's really a very fundamental aspect that Yiddishkeit emphasizes, that Judaism is not just rituals, it's actually a way of life. And a way of life, the way affects everything. The way it affects the way you tie your shoelaces, it affects the way you cut your nails, it affects the clothes that you wear, and the covering of your hair. Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman are Rabbanim that spoke against sheitels, and especially long sheitels, and in general against sheitels. So they're of the opinion that sheitels are frowned upon. Since there are ways to keep scarves from falling, why is the Rebbe's view reevaluated about slipping kerchiefs? the Rebbe, the first thing is like Miriam mentioned, and there are poskim that come and derive their halacha from a different understanding. For example, Rabbi Vadia Yosef, he says that a single girl has to cover her hair during prayer. And I have friends that their sisters cover their hair during prayer as single girls because they follow the psak of Rabbi Vadia Yosef. And his view is clearly that a sheitel is 1, 2, 3. It's a matter of tznius, and it's a matter of men being attracted by it, and that's his opinion. And so that's that opinion. The opinion of the Zohar and the opinion of other great poskim is that it's based on the Tumah about the Sitra Achra, and it's actually brought down in the Mishnah Brura, this Zohar in the name of the Magen Avraham, and he mentions the word that it's actually the impurities, the forces of impurities, and it's brought down in Mishnah Brura, and that's the view of Chassidus and the view of the Rebbe, and specifically, as Miriam showed on in the slideshow, there's a practicality, and there's two ideas. One is the practicality, and that is the idea of mirroring. Just it's a very basic human trait of mirroring. You see somebody doing something, and just automatically, if you put your hand here and you're sitting next to somebody else, you yawn, somebody else will yawn. There's a very simple human trait of mirroring. So the first idea is that you're in the present, a woman's in the presence of somebody else. Yes, of course, there are ways of covering the hair properly with a kerchief, with a tichel. And yes, that certainly does cover the hair and covers out all the forces of impurity, and it leaves no room for the impurity to come in. However, there's two things. One is the mirroring, the temptation, putting oneself. Miriam used those words. There's no reason to test oneself with this, especially if there's something that is an excellent way of not being tempted. And second of all, if you notice the end of the story, the Rebbe told the woman to get a sheitel that others will want to wear. It brings up a standard of pride that the women cover their hair with something that is respectable. That's respectable, and not chas v'shalom to say that a tichel is not respectable. It certainly is respectable, but it also brings an excitement, and it brings a big fervor to the mitzvah of covering one's hair. Do divorced women have to cover their hair, or almana, a widow? Why only the hair on the head and not the eyebrows, etc.? Okay, so I did think about this question, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to look it up. The divorced and widows have to cover their hair, and just what I'm familiar with, I haven't verified it, so I say that before. I'm just from in general. I'm pretty sure the Chabad custom it certainly is that they should cover the hair. And just thinking about it, you could think of two things. One is a very basic, fundamental idea in Shulchan Aruch when it comes to tznius, that something that is covered now becomes tznius. It becomes a matter of tznius. So once a woman covers her hair with a sheitel or a tichel, she covers her feet with shoes. So that now becomes an area that halacha requires always to be covered, and if it's open, then there's actually a problem of tznius now. If a woman is not wearing her head covering, that becomes a problem of tznius because it's the type of place on the body that's normally covered. So that's just on a very practical. It became now a place that's normally covered for her, so now that becomes a matter of tznius. So that's just a thought, and I'm not basing it on any sources, and it really should be looked up properly and addressed properly. And you could think likewise along the idea of mashpia mekabel, that she now she became connected to a mashpia, to a giver, and she still retains those qualities that make her receptible for the force of impurity to go after. And why only the hair of the head and the eyebrows is another very good question. The hair of the rest of the body is much more minimalistic, and it's not where the impurities go after. Now, for example, there were times that, for example, the Levium, by the Akamas HaMishkan, they were required to shave off all the hair of their body, including their eyebrows and all the hair on their body. And that is because they were on such a high spiritual level that even the eyebrows became a conduit for the force of impurity, because they were such primary targets, such holiness. And so the places that have a lot of hair, that's specifically the hair of the head. And additionally, if you understood it spiritually, how the hair of the head grows, then you understand also why specifically the hair of the head. Now, we can just briefly mention, and there's the obvious question, man's beard. That is also hair coming from the head. And the simple explanation of not such a simple concept is that, think about when the beard comes in on a man. It comes in at an age of maturity. It comes in when he's 13, 14, 15, going on, and continues to grow and grow even as he's an old man. And so, just borrowing, it really is the same concept of the excess of the body comes out in the way of hair, so the excess of chachma, of wisdom, also comes out in the way of hair. And in the way of this wisdom, the brain, the excess of the brain, a very high capability that can't be contained in the vessel of the head, drips down, and it drips down into the face, and that's why the beard is actually holy. It comes into the payas, it comes into the beard, and it makes actually that the beard and the payas are very holy. And I think that answers the question. Okay. A lot of questions here. If we're covering our hair when we get married, it's obvious to keep out beautiful features from the husband, for our husband alone. Okay. That's not so simple, but okay. If the sheitel is natural looking and often more beautiful than my own hair, how is this tznius and how can I wear it in public? This causes men to sin when looking at women. There's a lot of parts of this question. It bases on a premise that we keep out the beautiful features for husband alone, which is certainly an advantage of a sheitel. Although there are other poskim which it depends on the communities that say that the hair should be very short. But okay, but so it brings about beautiful features for the husband alone. So if the sheitel is natural looking, how is this tznius? How causes other men to look at? So this is what are they looking at? They're looking at a sheitel. So this was answered in they're looking at a sheitel. They're looking at a plastic cake. And okay. And there's two ideas. There's, first of all, the woman herself has to be tznius. The woman herself has to be modest. Are you going to go ask the men, what they think about this sheitel and what they think about that sheitel? and what they think about this dress and that dress, it's defeating the purpose. So there are guidelines in Allah of what's considered tznius and what's not considered tznius. And yes, it has the man's best interest in mind, and there are certain halachas that do apply when it comes to a man, and it's based on the halachas of tznius. Is there tznius regarding the length of sheitel? It depends on the community, like all tznius. For example, in Africa, where they don't go with shoes on, then it's going barefoot is not a matter of tznius. So it all depends on the community. It depends on every community. It depends on the standards of the community, and there are certainly many poskim that do talk about the length of the sheitel. And there are certainly many poskim that also talk about the length of the sheitel, and it all depends on the community. But it's certainly important to wear a sheitel. Okay, this was already answered. This is already answered. The reason that a man isn't attracted to a wig, even if he doesn't know it's a wig, because of mystical reasons. According to just to clarify, according to Chassidus, the idea that a woman wears a sheitel is again because of the klipa. And it's not because of the attractiveness, which is, again, mentioned in many of these questions. Of course, once a woman covers her hair, then the idea of uncovered hair becomes a matter of tznius. So, not having covered hair is a problem of tznius, because hair is covered. Any part of the body that's normally covered now becomes a problem of tznius. There are certain parts of the body that, regardless of what anybody says, becomes a matter of tznius, like the thighs, certain areas of the body that are, regardless of what people do. But after those parts, it's because of it's covered in that area, so it's covered in that part of the body is covered in that society, so that now becomes a matter of tznius. If real hair attracts impurity, then why is it a mitzvah for men to grow long beards? Okay, we did that. And why try to inspire women to wear a sheitel if that promotes jealousy, if I can't afford it? Isn't that selling unhealthy standards for a community? If it promotes jealousy, I don't know. Is this a problem? That it promotes jealousy? Okay. They're very expensive. Okay. Oh, so that's a good point. So they're very expensive. The nice ones are very expensive.
If it's not that, it'll be something else.
Yeah.
I feel like it'll just be...
Yeah, and also you saw that the Rebbe set up even, there are certain things that are vital. There are certain things in one's life that are vital, and people make sure that they cover those things regardless of what the costs are, and they'll go out to borrow. But for example, the Rebbe actually set up loans. He set up. My father-in-law has a gemach, and I'm pretty sure I remember that gemach being mentioned in regards to getting a sheitel, and that's a valid reason that the Rebbe set up loans for such things. And a woman wearing a tichel needs to be extra careful about her action in public. If she doesn't act properly, this affects all of Klal Yisrael. As the public sees she is Jewish, go Sheitels. Okay. Another question. Okay. Are we doing on time? We're good? If a woman walks in the street with a tichel, she is less attracting than with a wig. Erva is nakedness because it causes men to be attracted, and that, I don't know, can't read it. So this is the same question of tznius that we had before. There's also, this is just something that we notice. Sometimes wearing a sheitel is less attracting in general to a person. It brings less attention to a person than somebody that looks different. I'm not saying that's an absolute reason, but that's just a thought that was noticed. And again, the idea of erva is something that's normally covered is now an erva. The certain primary parts of the body that cannot be uncovered under any circumstances. If it were an erva, then a single woman would not be allowed to go with an uncovered hair. She would have to cover her hair. And like we said, there is an opinion that this is the reason for it, and therefore a single woman would have to cover her hair, and especially during tefillah. During tefillah, there's another aspect that a man or even a woman is not allowed to daven next to an erva. There are certain halachas of where you're allowed to pray. So therefore, if hair is erva, so even a single woman would also have to cover her hair in order to pray next to her. And this is, again, based on the outlook. If it's going according to the poskim that say it's a matter of attracting men, and this really answers many of the questions, then yes, all these questions are valid, and the halacha is different according to that opinion. But according to the other poskim, and the many poskim, and according to Chabad, and according to the Rabbi, and according to the opinions that permit a sheitel, like the many poskim that were mentioned. So therefore, the idea of erva is, like we said, something that the hair, something that's normally covered. There are so many poskim that forbid wigs. None forbid tichels. How could one say that a wig is better than a tichel when there are rabbanim that have aser sheitels? We explained that very, very well. Okay. We explained the Rebbe Shita by covering all the hair, and the Zohar was mentioned many times during the presentation.